Hi, I'm Louise. If your parents are overprotective, this story is definitely for you. But either way, let me tell you about my adventures. My dad always treated me like I was a treasure. On one hand, it was great. After all, that was his way of showing he loved me. But on the other hand, Dad went too far sometimes. Did I say sometimes? I meant always. When I was a kid, he used to say that bears roamed around our city when it got dark. That's why you shouldn't be out late. He even convinced me that all strangers I met were criminals, so I would never stray far from home. Dad didn't even want me to leave home to study, so he decided I should be homeschooled. Yeah, I didn't go to a regular school and was constantly supervised. Mom didn't approve of Dad's paranoia. One day, I even heard them arguing about it. Darling, don't you think you're going too far? You can't protect Louise from everything for the rest of her life. Yes, I can. One day, when I was a kid, I decided to hide from my parents on the roof and see what would happen. What followed was quite impressive. Dad made a huge fuss. The police and even firemen came running to our home, and everyone started looking for me. That's when I realized I messed up. I got down from the roof and with my head hung low felt terribly guilty. I thought Dad would be mad at me for the rest of our lives, but he just hugged me tight. Don't you ever do that again. You're the most precious thing in my life.
More precious than $1 million?
More precious than all the money in the world.
Wow, I'm priceless.
Exactly, sweetie. From that moment on, I always obeyed my dad and stayed at home, just like he wanted. However, my life wasn't boring. I trained wild boars and fought crime. Okay, it wasn't quite like that. I just wrote stories about adventures like that. That was my hobby, writing. I invented magical worlds and sent my characters on incredible adventures. There was even a website I published my stories on. Over the years, my skill improved, and by the time I graduated from high school, I had a lot of devoted readers on the internet. I was even sort of dating one of them. Tomai lived in Hungary, but his grasp on the English language was perfect. Like me, he couldn't imagine his life without writing. I'd never seen Tomai in real life, and we lived on different sides of the world. But as we texted each other, I realized he was my soulmate. He told me that he was going to participate in a writing competition organized by a prestigious college in Maine. He suggested that I take part in it as well. You are ridiculously talented. It'd be so cool if we both won and went to the same college. I was a dreamer and immediately imagined living in the same state as my favorite writer, Stephen King, going on romantic dates with Tomai, and studying at a charming college that looked like Hogwarts. My fantasies inspired me. That night, I wrote a story and sent it to the contest. I won't keep you in suspense. Both Tomai and I were great at writing, and both were invited to the college based on the results of the competition. However, I wasn't jumping for joy. Why? I remembered all of Dad's horror stories about the dangers of the world. Leaving my comfort zone and going to a new city seemed scary. But then I talked to my mom. Louise, don't let fear get in the way of your dreams. You don't want to be like our neighbor Samantha, do you? That woman was still living with her parents, even though she was in her 60s. I definitely didn't want to be like her. I made up my mind and I decided to move. But first, I had to talk to Dad. His answer was short and clear. No, no, and no again. Dad, I'm 18 already. I'm not a baby bird anymore. It's time for me to leave the nest. Baby, it's too dangerous. Don't you know there are ancient vampires, rabid dogs, and an evil clown living in Maine? I laughed and told him I'd already read King's novels and I knew none of those were real. Mom and I talked to Dad for a long time, and in the end, he gave in and let me go. Before I left, Dad gave me quite a bit of money so I could rent a good house and shed a tear. Children grow up so fast. One last thing, Louise. Yes, Dad? Remember that I will always watch out for you. I got into a taxi and headed towards my new life. And you know what? It sucked. The city was gray and rainy. My new neighbor, an old lady, was creepy and kept staring at me. Tomai ended up disappointing me as well. He was petty and jealous. Your daddy rented you a house, huh? Lucky you. He must be rich. He once told me that I was more precious than $1 million. I suggested we go on a walk, but Tomai said he wasn't in the mood. Well, I'll go alone then. What, and meet some handsome guy? Don't you dare go anywhere without me. I thought I couldn't be any more disappointed, but then I saw my new college. A dull, gray building packed full of bustling students and teachers. One of my classmates was a surly guy called Steven. He was rude and terribly mean. Compared to him, all the monsters from Dad's horror stories were harmless little angels. Steven immediately disliked me and started bullying me. Are you fearless or just dumb? What are you talking about? You're sitting in my place. Get lost or your textbooks will be in the trash. His words stung, and I looked at Tomai. I was hoping he would stand up for me, but he cowardly looked away. Yeah, Tomai was only a hero on the internet. I had no choice but to move. I regretted leaving home. The only thing that kept me from going nuts was my hobby. I got comfy and wrote down everything that happened to me in a little notebook, mixing up real events and fiction. So, in my stories, Stephen became an evil dragon, Tomai was a nasty goblin, and my creepy neighbor turned into a witch who didn't know how to smile. One gloomy day, I'd finally had enough. My insufferable classmate spent the day picking on me, and my boyfriend did nothing to put him in his place. I realized that Tomai was not the hero from one of my novels, and I broke up with him without any regrets. You wouldn't dare dump me. I already have. He shouted that I would regret it, but I didn't bother staying there any longer. After all, I'd already decided to leave college and come back home. I texted Dad. He was over the moon and immediately booked me a plane ticket. I knew I was being childish, but the real world wasn't for me. That evening, it started to rain again. I hated that stupid city. I went into a cafe to order a warm cup of coffee and write for a bit. Then, some gloomy guy in a hat walked in and sat at the next table. He looked like a maniac. His glasses glittered ominously from under his hat. I felt uneasy, so I got up and left. But then I realized he was following me. Miss, wait. I started running, but the guy in the hat quickly caught up to me. Stay away! I know karate! I just wanted to return your notebook. You left it on the table. Oops. I felt like a moron, and I sheepishly thanked the stranger. He adjusted his hat. I was left speechless. That was my favorite writer, Mr. King. Wow, I love your books. Oh, it's always nice to meet my fans. It turned out we were heading in the same direction. I got to talking and I told Mr. King that I dreamed of becoming a writer too. After I told him about how hard following my dream was, he gave me some inspiring advice. Louise, if you run away from problems, you'll miss a lot of opportunities and live a life full of regret. Overcoming obstacles builds character. Don't be afraid of anything, and remember that you can only see rainbows after rainfall. I thanked Mr. King for his wise words and said goodbye to him. Our meeting was a sign. My idol was right. It wasn't time to give up. I had to be bolder. I changed my mind about leaving and I texted Dad again. The next day at school, I decided I would have a serious talk with Stephen. I don't know what your problem is, dude, but I'm not gonna let you treat me like dirt anymore. He stared at me, confused. It turned out he hadn't even realized he was bullying me. Can you imagine? Sorry, I have a terrible temper. Sometimes I'm rude without even realizing it. I actually think you're cool, and I also noticed that we like the same books. But you're right, I do probably need to watch my tongue. As an apology, he treated me to a hot cocoa. To my surprise, Stephen had a vulnerable and creative mind behind his mask of a gloomy dragon. It turned out that he also loved adventures and had been working on his own book for a long time. We had a lot in common. While we were chatting, Tomai kept jealously squinting at me from afar and snorting angrily. But I didn't pay him any mind. After the lectures, I went home and saw my weird neighbor again. She was trying to get her kitten out of a tree. I was afraid of her, but decided to help anyway. We got to talking. Her name was Mrs. Baker, and she turned out to be the nicest person ever. Her facial muscles were paralyzed because of a disease. That's why she never smiled. I felt so ashamed of myself for the things that I thought about her. Thank you, Louise. Come over for tea sometime. I will. It turned out that if you don't run away from your problems and solve them instead, life gets better. Things were looking up. Well, besides one thing. Dad turned into a helicopter parent and kept calling and texting me all day long. Louise, why did you change your mind about coming back? There's something you're not telling me. I'm your father. You can tell me when you're in trouble. I told him I'd already dealt with my problems and I was doing fine. But Dad didn't believe me. He wouldn't even let me sleep at night. Why didn't you answer for a whole minute? Dad, it's 3 in the morning. I was sleeping. I'll find out what's going on with you. It annoyed me that Dad thought I was a helpless child. Soon, I realized I was being followed. Some weird guy stood by my house and followed me everywhere. At first, it scared me. However, I quickly realized that my father had sent a spy. After all, he had promised he would always watch over me. I was sick of it. So I decided to teach Dad a lesson. I turned off my phone and didn't get in touch with him for several days. If he couldn't treat me like an adult, then I would make him worry like I was a kid. The weather was great. I took a blanket and sweets and I climbed onto the roof. I spent the day lying and writing down everything that happened to me in my notebook, and then I fell asleep under the stars. The next morning, I was awoken by the sound of police sirens. I saw my parents and cops running downstairs. Wow, Mom and Dad had thought I was missing and came running. They didn't find me in the house and they eventually left. On the one hand, I regretted making my parents worry. But on the other, it was my dad's fault for being too controlling. Then, I heard a noise and realized someone was in my house. I got down and I found that damn spy inside. Okay, buddy, enough's enough. I know my dad sent you. Let's surprise him.
Okay, whatever you say.
We got into his car. I tried to think of what to tell Dad. His lack of faith in me hurt. It started raining again, and we arrived at a gloomy warehouse. That James Bond wannabe walked me straight inside and told me to wait.
Sit tight, I'll bring your father.
He went out and locked the door. Was that Dad's order too? He was probably just afraid I would leave again and wouldn't be able to catch me. Yeah, that sounded like him. But then, I heard that guy talking to someone on the phone outside the door.
Yes, Tomai, I did everything just like you ordered. Now that girl's dad is gonna give us a ton of money.
What? Was Tomai behind all this? Wanted to get revenge and must have thought we were rich, all because I told him I was worth more than $1 million to my dad. Ugh, Tomai was such a moron! My anger was immediately replaced by fear though. After all, I realized I had left my phone on the roof. Now, I wouldn't even be able to call for help. Dad had been right. The world was a dangerous place. I should have listened to him. I wanted to burst out crying like a baby, but then I remembered Mr. King's advice. I wasn't about to give up. So, I decided to use my talents and outwit the criminal. I came up to the door and knocked. Hey, Mr. Criminal! I'm hungry. Bring me lobsters and a cheesecake on a golden tray.
Watch it. Your father has to pay us first.
Oh, I don't envy you. My dad will be furious when he finds out you didn't even feed his dear daughter. Do you know who my father is? Oh, he's a scary man. Then I came up with a story and said that my dad knew the president, and he wasn't someone you should mess with. Luckily, the criminal wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. He believed me and opened the door.
Okay, I'll feed you. Just don't complain to your father.
I'll think about it. Oh, do you hear the helicopter? That's my ride!
Where?
He looked away, and I ran away from the warehouse. The kidnapper chased after me. Damn it, he was better at running than I thought he would be. So he very quickly caught up to me. Thankfully, we heard sirens and got surrounded by police cars. My parents got out of one of them. My kidnapper was handcuffed and pushed into a car. Tomai was already in it.
Louise, baby, are you okay?
Mom, Dad, how did you find me? It turned out my parents remembered the time that I'd hidden from them on the roof as a child. So they came back to the house, searched the roof, and found my notebook. After reading it, they realized that someone had been following me.
I realized Tomai was probably the one to blame. We called the cops and we went to his place. The scoundrel wasn't a tough nut to crack, and he immediately told us where we could find you.
We hugged, and I apologized for making my parents worry.
You will always be my little girl, but I see that you have become more independent. Please, just don't be so reckless. After all, you're priceless to us.
I promise, Dad. Soon, Tomai was sent back to Hungary, and his accomplice went to prison. I kept studying, and my parents often came to visit me. I liked my new life. One day, Stephen and I were walking under an umbrella, and I told him about my adventure.
Wow, that sounds like a great plot for a book. Let's write it together.
I smiled slyly and said I knew some people who might be interested in reading that. Then the clouds parted and a rainbow appeared over the city. Mr. King was right. You can only see rainbows after the rainfall.